I'm currently 22 years old and stationed on the US Sapien home ported in Norfolk, Virginia. We have a couple that I've heard of. The first and most creepy is a forward animal hold. Some of the AOs, ordnance handlers, have always felt funny going into the same space. One day, a couple of the AOs went to the space with a video camera. Upon getting close to the door, a green dot appeared on the camera screen and started moving around, and yet it wasn't visible without the camera. As they got closer to the door, the dot went away. The screen turned blue then black, then the red record light went out. Later, the camera's owner thought about it and realized that if his battery died, it would have stopped all at once. Upon turning the camera back on, he had half a charge on, more than enough to keep recording. He hooked it up to a TV and watched the video with his friends at the point where the camera shut off. The video turns into pure snow, just like any other blank tape. The rest is still there. None of the AOs will go to that hold unless ordered, and they don't even go by themselves. Another sapien ghost is in an engineering space. If somebody falls asleep below decks in the engineering spaces, and nobody wakes them up, there is still somebody that does. Who is that person? Or is it an apparition? One story I've heard was that a guy was asleep, and while asleep, somebody tapped him on the shoulder. In the Navy, we generally wake up people that way, so no matter how you dare sleep, a tap on the shoulder will wake you up. Anyways, upon waking up, he sees a figure go through a door and dog it down. Curious to see who woke him up, he goes through the door and nobody is there. It's normally credited to a death that happened on board. One of the ladder wells leading down to the aft engineering spaces is where the death occurred. A sailor fell down the stairs and died, and every night, between 0100 and 0200, the watch can hear somebody falling down the stairs, but nobody is there. From time to time, people witness a figure walk out one door and into another in the engineering spaces, only to be gone upon investigation. A couple of years ago, I used to have to take the bus every day to get to work. One morning in the late summer, I was riding to work on the bus traveling down Woodward in Detroit, and I saw a man dressed entirely in a Union soldier's uniform walking down the street. At first glimpse, I didn't even think anything of it, but if I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed, and no one did, I looked towards the window again, and the guy was gone. I really don't know if it was a ghost or not, but I know he looked very real and very out of place. To me, it just seemed too hot to be wearing that uniform with the musket, cap, and everything. It all looked so very authentic. He was an African American, looked old, like in his 70s, and the uniform wasn't even clean, like you would see in a reenactment. It was dingy. I would say this happened in late August, at around 10:30 a.m. Hello everybody. I am only 13, almost 14, but I think I've experienced paranormal phenomena. The first time was when I was about 10. I'd gotten a keyboard for Christmas, and it was set up with its stool in my room. I had just gone to bed, and just happened to look at the keyboard, and a black cat weaved its way through its legs. Naturally, I went screaming to my parents, and they reassured me it was nothing. Another time I awoke to a huge face floating in front of me. Now it may have just been my imagination, but I just don't think so. On another occasion, I was in the shower, and someone made a noise, like they were trying to say scary, in a drawn-out voice. I am the only one in the house that believes it's haunted. Sometimes when my sister goes by to my room to get to the bathroom, she snaps at me before she enters the bathroom. Well, one time I swear I heard someone snap at me. But when I turned around, no one was there. I checked the bathroom, and my sister wasn't there. My parents were in the living room, and my sister in hers. That one happened about a month ago. All the time I feel like someone is watching me, or is in the room with me, whenever I am alone in a room, in my house, even in my own room. Sometimes when I go to bed, I even make my parents look in my closet. I have told my mother and my sister about it, and they don't seem to think anything is wrong, and I'm just paranoid. But am I really paranoid? Or am I experiencing something? I know I may be 13, but that doesn't excuse all the things that go on. I just want to be credible to people. Our house was built in 1959. To my knowledge, nothing ever bad happened here. The first time we noted anything was in the mid-1970s. We moved here in 1970. Both my husband and I awoke in the night and saw the figure of a man walk across the room at the foot of our bed and disappear. My husband jumped up and turned the light on, and then ran throughout the house looking for the intruder. No one was found. Over the years, we have heard noises coming from the bedroom areas, doors closing when they are all open. Our neighbor has seen the lights on in the middle of the night when we are asleep. A few months ago, I was standing at the bathroom sink mid-morning and saw a man walk by. I thought it was my husband, and when I walked out to see where he went, he wasn't even there. I went back down the hall, and he was still in the master bathroom and had not walked down the hall. One day we were all sitting at the table, and the four of us observed a can of Coke move across the table and stop before it fell off the edge. In the basement on the carpet, a spot just became wet, even though I was the only person down there this week. I scrubbed it up, and so far, it has remained dry. We hear the sound of our doggy door being opened and closed. Even though the dog is asleep in front of us, there is far too many incidents to mention. But interestingly enough, our dog never acts like she hears any of these unnatural sounds, even though she barks at humans or dogs, etc. outside. I don't actually live with ghosts, but at my uncle's farm they have a cabin. It's going up for sale pretty soon. There is a ghost in the cabin. The funny thing is that they just built it, and no one has died in it or anything. My cousin said that the ghost is a girl that follows him everywhere. When my other cousin, my little brother, and I were watching a show in one of the rooms, then we heard footsteps walking across the floor upstairs. We tried to ignore it. Then in the middle of the movie screen went fuzzy. We all stared at the television shocked. Then my cousin screamed, and my brother and I screamed after her. We ran out of the cabin. We got to the house in 5 seconds. Apparently everyone heard us screaming, and we told them what happened, and they told us that the power probably flashed or something. But I still don't believe that. Please let me know what was going on here. Am I just freaking out, or did the whole entire family freak out? I want to tell you of an experience I had a little over a year ago. I was living in a house on Bassmaster Street in Youngstown, Ohio. I knew the house was haunted by a woman who was subdued by her husband some years before. I was a baby when she passed away. I think my room used to be her room. I never felt comfortable sleeping there, so I often slept on the couch in the living room. One night I woke up and felt like I could hardly breathe. I felt like there was a tremendous weight on me, and I couldn't move or speak except for open my eyes. I opened my eyes and saw a huge black hooded figure at the end of the couch, kinda leaning over like it was looking at me. Mind you, I couldn't see his eyes. Thank God. I instantly slammed my eyes shut and kept trying to scream, but I couldn't. Every time I opened my eyes, he was closer, till he was right over me. I took a deep breath in and started screaming. I woke my sons up. Needless to say, I got up and turned on every light in the house. I think it was Death. I don't know why he came to me. Not long after my grandmother passed away, lived right next door to me. I have more stories about the apartment if you want to know. I also have a picture I believe is Teresa. That's who was haunting my house. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your website. I was staying at my auntie's home in Tasmania, where I learned very quickly the horrors of its past. Her home was built in the 1900s, when convicts first landed. Their home still has the remains of a moat, servants' headquarters, and the hospital, which it became. I went down with my grandparents. They had warned me of the presence in the home. My grandfather had seen a young girl in a long white nightgown, holding a candle, enter the spare room as she vanished before his eyes. The very first night we arrived, the fun began. I was sleeping in my cousin's room when I woke to something calling to me. As I opened my eyes, I saw two white fairies floating above me. As the light from the moon hit the room, they vanished. From that night on, as I slept, I could feel something touching my head. Around 4 days later, as we all slept, smoke filled the rooms. The strange thing was, our door was open, but nothing entered. The next morning, we awoke to find all of the display plates, which were kept in a locked cupboard, left lying on the floor in perfect order. 2 nights later, there was this huge storm, and as the dogs had puppies, they had got loose and were running in the yard. My auntie was awoken by a frozen touch on her cheek, and there was a man that stood over her and pointed out the window. Once she left the room, he vanished. A few days later, I got sick and was in the computer room with my cousin, as I wasn't allowed outside. As I stared at a doll, I swear it blinked at me. I got out of there so fast. Later on that day, I went to go to the toilet. With this house, there is one large, huge room, which contains the laundry, bathroom, and the toilet. As I entered the room, the bathroom door wasn't quite shut, and I saw a man standing in there. I ran out of the room, and when my grandmother asked who was in the shower, as my cousins were in the room, my uncle and grandfather were out in the back in the shed. My grandma and auntie were in the lounge room. After a few days feeling well, I went back outside to play when I was confronted by the man in the shower. I later found out that his name was Shane, and he had once owned the home. He was found shot. Also, while playing outside hidden behind huge evergreen trees, was once appeared to be a gravesite, As I headed for the house, I saw the most gruesome sight of a man from the window under the house. Thankfully, after that day, I was heading home. They've since seen a little girl who skips around the house, and they heard the sounds of screams of pain in the rooms. I didn't hear anything like that. They did move out after that, though. When I was 7 years old, my family purchased a house in the outskirts of Los Angeles. I remember my father bragging to most anyone he knew that he got the house for a steal. I guess it didn't really matter that a stiff wind could probably knock the house on its side. It was that run down. It was a 2-level house with the main rooms being on the first floor, 3 bedrooms on the second floor, and a small fruit cellar below. When we first arrived at the house, I noticed a mailbox with a small stick-on letters that spelled out HORTON. That was the first thing my father intended to change. He pulled on some stick-on letters out of his pocket and proceeded to spell out our last name. I promise you, my father tried everything from industrial strength glue to eventually nails. Our letters would just never stay up. At some point he must have just given up, and we left it as is. As my father was valiantly trying to get those darn letters to stick, my brother and I charged ahead into the house to do some exploring. There are 2 things that stick out in my head from that initial visit. I noticed in the upstairs of the bedrooms, a dartboard hanging on the wall, with a single dart placed in the bullseye. I don't know why, but for some reason, this really disturbed me. Maybe because the entire rest of the house was completely empty. I'm not really sure. And then secondly, I noticed that most of the doors had those old-fashioned skeleton keyholes. I was instantly reminded of the old fairy tales where the wife had tried everything, including peering into a keyhole, much like this one, to get a look into that forbidden room. I bent down, placed my eye to the keyhole, and looked into one of the bedrooms. I think I was curious to know if you could easily see anything by looking into one of those things. And guess what? You can. I remember seeing something, tall and black, scurry across the floor, something that almost resembled a large dog. My father probably surmised that it was probably some type of animal, or quite possibly a shadow. In any case, I was relieved to find out that this was to be my parents' room. Almost immediately, my father began renovating plans. The entire back end of the house was to be added onto, including a new kitchen and dining room on the main level, 2 new bedrooms on the upper level, and the basement extended below. As the workmen were digging up the ground in the backyard, they uncovered many strange things, including an antique thimble set, childhood toys, coins, an axe handle, photographs, and almost an entire deck of old-maid playing cards. As my sister and I sat around thumbing through these new treasures, I happened to glance up just in time to see my eldest sister falling headfirst into the pit that was to be our new basement. To this day, my sister, who is now 40, swears she was pushed violently from behind. In any event, the result from the injury was a broken leg and a few cuts and bruises. We were all warned to be more careful around the construction site. A few days after this incident, I had a chunk of plaster thrown at my head. It could have been one of my sisters or my brother playing a trick, but they were all in their teens at the time, and I don't think they would find it funny to throw a piece of plaster at their little sister's head. Strange things were occurring inside the house as well. I constantly felt as though I was being watched, and was often plagued by feelings of absolute horror. I might be in a room playing or watching the television, when an overpowering feeling to flee the room would hit. Believe me when I say, I did just that. My sisters were constantly at each other's throats over missing items. And sometimes, those items would appear right in bizarre spots. Some were never even seen again. Lights and appliances would turn on by themselves. Footsteps could be heard in the middle of the night. Items would come crashing down in uncoupled rooms. A strange buzzing sound, almost like an electrical charge, seemed to emanate throughout the entire home, and the list goes on. We also had a problem with fires. My mother was awoken in the middle of the night by the smell of smoke, and upon investigation, she found that someone had closed the cover on her toaster oven and hit the start button with nothing being inside. This is an old 70s style oven where you actually had to press a release button to turn the power off. Otherwise, it would have just kept on going. By the time my mother reached the scene, the entire toaster was up in flames, practically burned to a crisp. That was the first of 7 fires that occurred in that house. As a child, I detested peanut butter. Even the smell of it would send my stomach churning. My brother found it amusing to consume a sandwich and then hold me down and breathe on me. Ugh, gross. Anyhow, I was sitting in the living room watching the Saturday morning cartoon marathon when my brother walked in fresh from eating a PB&J sandwich. I knew what was coming, and I wasn't in the mood for his games. A constant pounding sound that had kept me awake for half the night, and I was cranky from the lack of sleep. We began to tussle, but were abruptly interrupted. From out of nowhere, an insole from a pair of shoes fell on the floor between us. We just stood there and stared at each other for a few seconds, our hands still on each other's shoulders. This insole actually seemed as though it fell straight out of the ceiling. As we were trying to figure out the origin of the peculiar item, we were startled by a loud knock at the front door. From our vantage point, we could both see the front door from where we were standing. There stood an old lady with whitish hair, wearing a black shawl. Something about her eyes struck me as odd. They were so dark, it almost appeared as though someone had stuck 2 large black buttons in her eyes. As my brother approached the door, she vanished almost instantaneously, like she had never been there at all. It's not as though she simply turned and walked away. She disappeared into thin air. One minute she was there, and the next she was gone. I would be lying if I said we opened the front door to take a look around. We did peer out the window, checking for any signs of where she may have went. We saw nothing on the front yard, nor the driveway. My brother was convinced that we had just seen a witch. When we returned to the living room, a mysterious insole from the shoe was also missing. It's also interesting to note that a fenced-in gate surrounded our entire property. For someone to gain access to the grounds, they would need to be electronically buzzed in. This still puzzles me to this day. My brother, being the inventive boy that he was, liked to build forts. They were mostly constructed of yardsticks and blankets, or whatever else he could get his hands on. When my mother saw us playing in there one day, she forbade it, as she feared I could suffocate myself. Even though I was 7 at the time, I was very small for my age. I reluctantly agreed and scampered off to play in my bedroom. I was playing with some dolls when a little boy walked in. Now, I don't know who or what this little boy was, but to me, he looked like a real person. I honestly thought that he was a friend of my brother's, although he did seem a little bit young to be chumming around with my bro. I remember him asking me if I wanted to play. Being lonely and not having many friends, I quickly agreed and was happy to have a new playmate. He suggested playing in the fort. Now I knew I wasn't supposed to do that, but I was just so happy to have a new friend that I agreed and made a mental note to be extra careful while inside the fort. Almost as soon as we were inside the fort, the little boy told me that he had to go, but that I should wait there for him to come back in a little while. I have no idea how long I waited, but sometime later, I heard my entire family frantically calling my name, obviously searching for me. To this day, I have no idea why I didn't answer. Maybe I was afraid of being caught. I don't know. The blanket that was served as the door was yanked up, and I saw my mother's anxious face peering inside. Eventually, I explained the entire story to my parents. Although they believe me, the identity of that boy remains unknown, and I never saw him ever again. There were only 5 other families that lived in our street, and we knew all of the neighborhood children. It wasn't any of them. I kick myself now for not even asking the boy what his name was. That might have helped some. I've heard many stories on this and other sites, but I've never heard of anyone interacting with a ghost as I've just mentioned. Weird, huh? Thinking back on that little boy, the only thing that struck me as being a little bit weird is the way he moved. It was slow, yet fast, and his movements were jerky, if that makes any sense. Also, for a young boy, his voice was very mature and sounded very much like the voice of my father. I know it sounds truly bizarre, but I swear it happened. And even though it's been 20 years since this event took place, I still remember it as though it was yesterday. We stayed in that house for a total of 5 years, and as the years passed, strange things continued to happen. My entire family suffered in one way or another from the haunting. My eldest sister suffered the most, but for the time being, I'll stick to my own stories. For Christmas one year, my aunt had given me a hideous green and orange stuffed clown whose nose would glow red and play a musical melody. At first glance, I hated this thing and quickly stuffed it in some dark recess in my closet. Sometime in the middle of the night, I had awoken, desperately needing to use the restroom. The idea of walking through a darkened hallway at 3 a.m. was not a desirable prospect, but by this point, it was an absolute necessity. I made my way down the stairs and was just about to round the corner into the living room when I heard it. Soft jewelry box music was coming in the general direction of the living room. Peeking my way around the corner, I saw the stuffed Christmas clown propped up in the middle of the couch, its nose glowing in the darkness. I hightailed it back upstairs, wetting myself in the process, and jumped in my bed, shaking like a leaf. It scared me half to death. Nothing scared me more in that house than the spirit who I dubbed the old man. I saw him many times both inside the house and also in the fields behind our house, just kind of standing there, staring intently up at the house. He always wore a brown business type suit and a top hat. I've always had nightmares about him over the years. Most of them would entail me being in a room with my back to the doorway. Instinctively, my back would tense. I would spin around, and he would pounce, charging at me full speed from the other end of the room, sometimes carrying an axe, or sometimes not. One thing that sticks out in these dreams is that he somehow was more vivid and colorful than the rest of his surroundings. He always seems to stand out, if you know what I mean. I always felt that he was standing right behind me on the staircase, ready to give me a good push. Indeed, I did fall down those stairs many, many times, no matter how careful I was. But luckily, I was never seriously injured. I know this sounds crazy, and heck, the whole story sounds crazy, but I think he used to like to hang out in my walk-in closet and hiss so loudly that it almost sounded like a rattlesnake. I think he got a kick out of scaring me, as he liked to turn the lights out on me. When you walk down into the basement, there was only one switch for the entire area situated to the left of the door as you were heading downstairs. Now, I hated to go down there for anything, but it was a must on this day because our fridge had burned out once again, and dying apparitions were a big problem in this house. Seeing as the only other working fridge was in the basement, my mother asked me to go down there to get some necessary items for dinner that evening. I ran down the steps to the refrigerator, grabbed whatever it was I was supposed to get, and bam, the lights went out. I started screaming and ran for the stairs, absolutely certain that he was hot on my trails. As I was finally reaching for the door, I heard it, and I swear I will never forget this. Laughter, but not just any laughter. This laughter literally chilled me to the bone. It was somehow evil and mocking, as if to say, I missed you this time, but next time, you may not be so lucky. Needless to say, I was spooked. I'm not sure who it was who was laughing, but I do know that the laughter was male, and only my mother and I were at home at the time. At some point, a shadow also began to show up on our living room wall. My sister and I were watching a movie one night when I first saw it, and there was no mistaking it. This shadow was definitely of a person, and somehow darker and more opaque than what a regular shadow should be. We moved everything around that room, shaking our hands in front of it, trying to figure out its origin or what it might be causing it, to no avail. That shadow appeared in the same spot every night until we moved from that home, sometimes disappearing for a few hours, only to reappear sometime later. I think the guys also like to mess around with the phone lines. Many times when you would pick up the phone, all you could hear was the static, or there might be a couple of voices in the background, although you could never make out exactly what they were saying. On one occasion, I picked up the phone only to hear ear-shattering static. Before I had enough time to put the receiver back on its cradle, I heard a man say hello in a slightly, very mocking manner, and then that same god-danged laughter. That really scared me. Other people, including my grandmother, reported calling our home, and a strange man would answer. A second later, the phone would start to ring normally, and one of us would eventually answer. This to say, this unnerved me to no end. Once, and only once, I was upstairs in my bedroom listening to the stereo with a girlfriend of mine on one of those perfect, sunny Southern California afternoons. We were kind of goofing off, singing along, when a man's voice started to come through the radio. Believe me when I say, this was no radio broadcast. Language was foul and violent, much too obscene to be repeated here. My friend and I just stared at each other, becoming more frightened by the minute. When I finally couldn't take it anymore, I reached over and pulled the plug, thinking that would put an end to the disturbing episode. To my complete astonishment, the radio just kept on playing. Okay, playtime is over. Time to head to my friend's house. I really don't know how to explain this, but somehow we learned to live with these things as a family. I got used to being afraid, expecting things to go missing. I barely glanced if a door slammed on its own, or a light mysteriously came on. I expected to hear my name being called out in the middle of the night, and so on. Was I still scared? Yeah. Deathly terrified might be a better term, but somehow I managed to live with it. Maybe these ghosts or spirits, or whatever you wanted to call them, sensed that and decided to turn it up a notch. Now, I'm not really sure what happened next, because my father-in-law is now deceased and refused to talk about this with anyone other than my mother, and she too refuses to discuss this. All I know is that my two sisters, my brother and my mother and I, traveled to Arizona for 4 days to visit my grandmother, leaving my father in the house by himself. Something obviously happened, which really spooked my father. One night, I eavesdropped on one of the conversations that my dad was having with my mother, and all I could really make out was something about borrowed time, all of the windows opening at once, and an old man. The very next day, my father decided that we were moving as soon as possible and was putting the house up for sale. With that being said, the entire family decided to go out for dinner and celebrate. Upon returning home, something caught my eye that was sort of strange. A single light was burning in my parents' bedroom. Now, if you know my father, you would know that he was a complete stickler about leaving the lights on. The number one rule in my house was to shut the lights off as soon as you left a room. A light burning in my parents' bedrooms, of all places, was quite odd. As soon as our father unlocked the front door, our two dogs went rushing out. I thought I was going to have a heart attack at 12 years of age. On further inspection, it seemed as though the dogs had literally tried to chew their way out of the front door, given the huge bite and scratch marks all over the front door. As soon as my father flicked on the lights, I gasped. It's kind of hard to describe what I saw. The entire house was in disarray. The living room couch was standing on its side. Lamps were broken, mirrors shattered, drawers yanked out of the kitchen cabinets, silverware strewn all over the floor. My father was convinced that someone had broken into the home. We were told to remain outside the house while my brother and mother walked to a neighbor's house to call the police. This was before cell phones. The police arrived somewhere between a half hour to an hour later. An actual police report is documented concerning these reports. The police checked the doors and windows for signs of an intruder, dusted for prints, talked to our neighbors, and checked the house thoroughly for anyone who might be still lurking around. Their investigation turned up nothing. My father ordered us all upstairs to pack up some belongings. We weren't staying. As I was heading into my bedroom, I happened to glance into my parents' room and noticed that the lamp sitting on my father's nightstand was starting to burn, wallpaper behind it. I don't know if this was just my nerves or what, but it honestly looked as though there was a pattern of a burn that was turning into a face. The face of none other than the old man who had been haunting me for years. As I was standing there looking at it, my mother came up behind me and gasped. I think she saw the same thing as I did. When I arrived at my grandmother's house later on in that evening, I heard my mom and dad discussing my grandmother with some of the things that had just happened. If I had known these things while living there is no way I would have gotten even one night of sleep there. Not that I did anyways. It's now been over 20 years since I've lived in that home, yet it still continues to haunt me. Considering the fact that we lived in the house for just over 5 years, numerous other events took place that I haven't included, but it's hard to fit the 5 years of living into a single submission. The house is still standing, and I occasionally drive by just for kicks. The house has been almost completely renovated from the outside, and often when I drive by, I see the for sale sign perched up on the front lawn. It seems as though no one stays in the house for too long. It's interesting to note that I've never again experienced anything ghostly or otherworldly since leaving that home. That remains my one and only true experience with the other side. I am a restaurant manager in a small town in Georgia, Milledgeville. Now I have to mention that the building this restaurant is in was brand new when we opened. About 7 months after we opened the doors the first time to the public, it all started. At that time, I was promoted into management and took over second shift. The employees and me started to see a shadow figure walking in the back of the home, always by the ice machine and dry storage room. One day I was carrying a glass rack to the dish room when the swinging door that separates the dining room from the back of the home opened and stayed open until I walked through the door and put the rack down by itself. This is a swinging door that we just push open with our foot to walk through. It swipes right back, except for that time. As I walked through the door, I looked and saw no one by the door that could have opened it for me. At that time, all I had was one server who was taking an order in the dining room at the time, one cook that was on the grill line cooking an order, and me. No dishwasher yet. Things have been progressing over the last 3 years. When I walked out of my office one night after closing, the dish cart started rolling from the swinging door to the dining room, right in front of me. I was the only one left in the building. Now things are starting to happen in the front of the house. I now am running shifts during the day, from 5:30 in the morning to 3 or 4 p.m. depending. Glass racks are coming out of their slots by themselves. One time a rat came completely out of its slot and fell on the floor, with only one server there, and she was nowhere near it. She got scared when she saw that. We always see a shadow figure walk around in the dining room now, also on the grill line, and then back to the dry storage room. All the employees had some kind of something happen that neither one of us can explain, but don't get a bad feeling when anything happens, and we just name the shadow figure George. We also talk to George a lot. When asked to please stop moving things, it stops, if only for that day. We all sure would like to know what's going on here, and how did George come into a brand new building to stay? Nothing too scary, I know, but they are not all scary. I think ghosts are just people like us. This is an account of a shadow person. I was sat in the dark in a security lodge which is mostly made of windows. About 3 a.m., I turned and noticed the shadow of what I thought was a man looking into the lodge window from the outside. When I looked at the shadow, it turned slowly and walked to the side, which would have put the person making the shadow move into the open road. Surprised that there would be anyone there at this hour, I looked out of the window and saw nobody. I looked around the lodge, but nobody was around. It began to strike me as strange. I did the usual thing of checking to see if it could have been an anomaly caused by automobile lights, etc. But there were no automobiles around or any other light source's probable cause. There was something about the shadow that just struck me as odd. The shadow was the presence. It did not seem to cast by another presence. I could not think of anything that would attract such a being, so I just put it down to experience. However, a while later I was on a website where a woman with knowledge of a shadow person was explaining that they enjoy hanging around illness and death. A work colleague at the time had his wife seriously ill with some illness, like Alzheimer's or something, and he would bring her to work as she could not be left alone. We work alone, so there is no problem with bringing a wife like that. Around the time I saw the shadow person, his wife died at home. Had the shadow person gotten into the habit of visiting the lodge to watch events there? I'm not sure. I have been seeing and feeling things since I was 17 months old. My mother was raised to believe in the paranormal, and so was I. My first encounter happened when I was 17 months old. My great-grandfather had just passed away. I don't remember seeing him or talking to him, but I do remember the smell of his cologne. My mom told me this when I got older. She said that she just put me down for bed, and a few minutes later she heard me talking. So she came back to check on me and I told her it was Papa, and that was that. I never saw him again until he moved into the house we are living in now. My second encounter happened a few months after my great-grandmother passed. This was when I was 12. When I was little, she had given me a jewelry box. I was little, and I had put the baby powder in it. Well, a few weeks after she had passed, I was vacuuming my room, and nothing was near that jewelry box, and it just fell off my drawer. It even fell off when I was in the living room watching TV with my dad. The last time it fell, I was at my nanny's, and my mom had the door shut, so no one was in there. When it fell, my mother got up and cleaned it out and put it in her room, and well, that was the last time it did anything. My great-grandmother was telling me to clean it. Now, my papa was beautiful to me because I knew him for 11 years, and he was my everything. Unfortunately, I was 13 when he had passed away. That night in the hotel room by the hospital after he had passed, we were getting ready for bed. My mom was crawling in the bed with me when my step-grandmother said, "Shell, is that you standing there?" My mother replied, "No, Mama, I'm in the bed." Well, my grandmother told us what she saw. There was an angle where my mother had stood. My mother couldn't see it, but I could barely. I know it was him telling us that everything would be okay. My papa always messed with me, so I wasn't really surprised if he did that after death. One night I was in my nanny's living room at 11 o'clock, waiting for CJ to get home. My nanny was in bed, and I was watching TV. Well, there's a desk close to my nanny's room. That's where my papa used to do bills there when he was alive. I remember before I sat down that the chair was pushed in. A few minutes later, I heard a cracking noise, and I looked over, and the chair was out of place. Of course, I was scared, and it made me forget that it was pushed in. I told Nanny, and she said it was probably your papa. The last time I was at her house before she moved, I just got out of the shower. I was drying my hair, and I heard a name. I don't remember if it was Randy or Rodney, but I asked my granny, and she told me that it was probably someone he knew, so I left it at that. I had used this old phone because mine was dying. Well, we took it home before CJ and her boyfriend Joe could pawn it. This was a few months before my nanny moved out from up there. CJ and Joe were stealing stuff and pawning it. Well, we had the phone, and one night out of the blue it started ringing, and it said Dad. My mom answered, and nobody was there. Well, the funny thing is, it was dead and shut off. Well, the next time it rang, I was at home, and this time it said Joe, and I answered. Of course, nobody was there. We took the battery out, and my nanny moved, and now no one knows what has happened to Joe or CJ. My dad's father just passed away recently, and I was very close to him. I did everything with him when I was little. I'm even named after his daughter who passed away when she was 3. I was like his daughter, and the one chance he got to know what it felt like to have a little girl again. He passed away December 8th. I was 16, and I miss him dearly. When I was little, they had lived in a trailer. I knew his daughter was there because I could feel her, even though I never saw her. When they moved to that house that is on the hill above the trailer, I could feel something that wasn't good. I still feel it when I go over there. I don't feel Diana, his little girl, or even my papa. The week my papa passed away, my mom asked me to vacuum his room. Well, I started the vacuum. And you know that feeling you get when you know you're not alone, and it feels like someone is going to hurt you. Well, that's how it felt, and I started to panic. I hurried and looked down just for a moment, and then I looked up, and my mom scared the living crap out of me. I left the room and let her finish. To this day, I never go back there, or even go to the bathroom there, because I never want to feel that feeling ever again. I know I am very blessed to have had the chance with them all, and to know that they are watching over me and protecting me, because sometimes, when I'm alone or scared, I can smell their perfume or feel their presences, and I know that I'm not alone, or that I shouldn't be afraid anymore, because they're always going to be with me. I just emailed you a ghost story about my boyfriend's death, and the orbs related to it. If you haven't read it yet, basically I saw orbs of my boyfriend hovering around me every night after midnight. I have no idea why this even happens at this time, but anyway, to continue my story, my friend stayed in her music throughout the night and did not feel welcome to stay in his room. She is familiar with ghosts, and I have not been well since his death. I have grieved so hard I became a threat to myself to the point in which I was thinking of doing the unthinkable. I am just now coming to grips with the situation with my boyfriend. Well, maybe I hold him here, if you know what I mean. I want him to pass through and find some peace so we can go to the light, but I'm not sure what I should do to help. I am so distraught over this. He has visited me and also 4 people I know by dream. He even visited my 5-year-old to tell him he loved him, and that he had to go to heaven now, and his nephew had a dream with some of our memories in it. He told him to take my wife, meaning me, and said God bless you at the end. My friend dreamt of him where he walked through, and said sorry, I don't know why I'm here, and my uncle had a dream with my boyfriend urging him to remind me to let him go, so I could move on. But it is really tough when someone has become a huge part of your life, and has played a major role in it for so long, and to have that person vanish before your eyes and be gone is just unconscionable to me. We used to have long talks about mortality, about how one of us couldn't last if one of us were to depart, and it just kills me to know that we can't have just one more conversation, or that we won't be able to live to see my son grow up, get married, and be successful. I swore I was going to marry this man. I did have a dream where someone I believed to be him was trying to walk me through a mist. It's kinda hard to explain, but the dream was foggy and his face was partially obscured by the mist or fog, but the outline of his body was the same as my boyfriend's, and I could make out his hair. He reached out his hand to me without saying a word, and when I did, I awoke, and just like that, he was gone again. I must admit I've been on meds, but still, I felt like it was him. The coroner said that what he did to himself was accidental, but he just took it too far. Maybe he just didn't understand his own limits and did something to himself without thinking. But it's the way that he took care of himself that was too suspicious to be accidental. He told his family that day right before he did it, that he was going to do it and that was final. They didn't come to check on him, and I was gone from the house to come home, and found him the way that he was, lifeless, and just gone. After his death, I would scream for him in that room. It was just so horrific. Please, if anyone can help guide me through this, it would be so helpful to me, as I've been so distraught, and I feel like his soul is so lost. I talked to a psychic medium. She said he came and rubbed my hair at night, and he said to stop the tears and he could come through. But she said he didn't want me to live my life stagnant. I have many lessons to learn, and other things to figure out with the entire loss. We were complete soulmates, but I believe in an afterlife, and I believe that we will reunite one day and live many more lives together, as crazy as it sounds. Since his death, I have now turned to a monk for guidance. I am currently studying Hindu philosophy. My boyfriend believed in God. I've been living in this house for close to 3 years. For the first 6 months, nothing happened. One night, my hubby and I were laying on a spare mattress in the living room watching a movie. This was around 11:50 at night. We started hearing these heavy footsteps in the home. We have 2 doors leading into the living room. One of the sliding doors was right beside us, and the other one is approximately 5 meters away from us. We heard footsteps in the hallway outside the door furthest from us. At first, we thought it was my older brother who was also living with us, but he has this routine where he goes to bed at 10 p.m., and it's the same night every night, and he doesn't change his routine. Weird, I know. We looked at each other thinking, is that Mika walking around in the hall this time of night? We sat there listening to the footsteps that next walked into the kitchen, which has a door that leads into the living room where we were closest to. The footsteps came closer and closer until they stopped just outside the sliding door. We waited. We listened. We were expecting my brother to open the door and have a whinge that our TV sound volume was on far too loud, even though it wasn't. But he's like that, you know. We waited, and then my hubby pushed the sliding door and opened it, and we found nothing. The other door on the far side of the kitchen was also closed, which leads into the hall that the footsteps originated from. We were a bit spooked because we both heard the steps, And laying on the mattress on the floor could sure as heck feel the vibration in the floor from those footsteps. We decided to search the home, minus my brother's bedroom, and we found nothing. An old man lives next door, and I was starting to imagine that perhaps he passed away and wandered over to our home. We saw him a few days later alive and well. That threw that notion out the window. The next morning we asked Miko if he were up last night, and he says no. We told him what we heard, and all he could do was shrug and insist that he was in bed and didn't even come out. I believed him simply because there was no way he could have walked away without us noticing when hubby opened the door, and the footsteps never left. It just stopped outside the door. But nothing was there. One thing that does happen though, is that birds are always hitting our front window. This has happened so many times that I lost count. I'm not sure if this is significant, and whether it's a common occurrence, with houses with weird things happening inside. Another thing that we notice on a few occasions is phantom smells. Sometimes they are really, really pretty, but other times it is foul. They rarely last more than 10 minutes. For a while, things were back to normal, but my brother said one day, I don't know who is always walking past my window or what they want. I asked him who, and he says some kid. He believes it was a girl, probably no older than 8 or 9. He walks past his window and heads towards the backyard, and he never sees her walk back. This has happened about 4 times that he can recall. I told him, why don't you go out there and check it out? He always has some excuse of he was busy, plays online games, and says he was in the middle of something. Okay, let's continue. About 9 months after hearing the footsteps, we heard them again. We were in the bedroom this time, and it sounded like coming from the laundry and kitchen area. Again, we investigated, checked all the locks and the doors, but everything was secure and fine. I asked my hubby if he believed that the house was haunted. He said that it was a very real possibility. Not too long ago, I was taking a bath around 11 p.m., and I heard a really loud thump just outside my bathroom window. I got out of the tub and wrapped a towel around me and met my hubby in the hallway. He thought I might have fallen, and I told him that it seemed to come from the outside window. We switched on the backyard light that had an outdoor seating area, but the place was clear. We didn't go outside, but we could tell nothing was on the floor that could have made that sound. We went into my son's room to look out the window where the garage and the rest of the yard is, but couldn't see much, save for a few feet from the house because the outdoor lights aren't strong enough, and the trees are too dark and cast many dark shadows. We just put it down to maybe the neighbor was outside doing something, though it was dark, and if that were the case, wouldn't have the light been on? But recently, I got a real shock of my life. About 3 months ago, they put the house on the market, and around this time, I went into my son's room about 7 p.m. to wake him to get him ready for school. It was still quite dark, though the sun was starting to come up, and you could see enough. I pulled his bedroom curtain open and saw what looked like a girl child in the yard, looking directly at the window. That's when she just stood there watching, and then she turned her body and made her way towards the back of the garage. She kept looking my way for a few seconds before looking away and disappearing behind the garage. I didn't know what to think, to be honest. What would she be doing out there at that time of the morning, wearing inappropriate clothing for that time of morning? I'm not even sure if she was solid or not. I was just thinking, who are you? And why are you in my yard? I think she wore a light blue dress. It could have been white. I didn't have too much light, but it almost seemed like she had a bit of a glow. I could even tell that she seemed to have long blonde hair. By now, my brother and my hubby had left for work, and I was alone in the home with my son, and there was no way I was going to go into the yard to investigate. What if she wasn't a little girl? Can a little girl create such heavy footsteps? She is always spotted outside, yet the footsteps are inside. Or is that something else inside? Is she trying to warn me? I've seen shadows here and there, and many things have been breaking down recently. Since the home was put on the market, Our little portable oven broke down. Our microwave is breaking down. My washing machine isn't working well anymore, and it won't do the final spin cycle. The hot water mysteriously stopped working as well, and the landlord came by to fix it, and says he doesn't even see anything really wrong with it. The hot water started working again. The toilet was blocked up with the root of a tree, but why now? The kitchen faucet broke and fell off. Our video player stopped working. It chewed up a tape and had to throw it out. Birds continue occasionally flying into our front window. Always that same window. It happened on the day of the house auction too. And it's not just these, but also illnesses. My son was choking on food the other day and needed an ambulance. Since living here, my hubby has needed 2 surgeries, one being spinal, and he's always been strong. And then he spent a year out of work with a bad back. He developed diabetes while living here, though a test a year ago said he was fine. I also developed problems. Locked-in ovarian syndrome, an umbilical hernia, requiring surgery in near future, and high blood pressure that recently got even higher, ankle swelling that can't really be explained, chest infections that occur frequently, and a few others. Before living here, we were fit and healthy, and it's like being here is making us sick. And it could be a coincidence, but you can't help to think about these things. I've read that there is a house somewhere in Europe, I think, and that people that move in there die of a heart attack within 2 weeks of living there. I don't know if it was in Switzerland, but the thing is, even those had no history of being ill. They say the house is cursed, and who knows if this is why we're getting these issues. We are moving out in a couple of weeks, and we are counting the days. I feel more like a 7-year-old these days than a 36-year-old, and all these changes have happened in the past 3 years of living here anyway. But this is my story. As a teen, I lived in a nice newer home on Vulcan Road in Perkin, Indiana. My parents and I were the second family to live in it. When we went to just view the house to see if my parents wanted to live there, I found myself afraid to go inside. I was only 12 years old at the time and had no idea what I was afraid of. I had encounters with things I couldn't explain before, but they never scared me like this house did. My parents talked me into going inside. I wasn't happy, and actually I cried, but went in anyway. It had 3 bedrooms and a large basement and a yard. My dad and mom decided it was perfect for us and started with the purchase plans. Inside the house, the back bedroom, which faced the woods behind, and on the side of the house, truly was only part of the whole place that made me feel very uneasy. I made mom promise that I would be put in there to sleep, and she agreed that I would get the larger of the 2 bedrooms in the front end of the house. The problems didn't start right away for me anyways. My parents took the room that I refused. My dad was away a lot for work, and so my mom got the first experience. She kept them a secret from me till my last day of school. That year we had gotten new bedroom suits, and I was put in that room. Not for long enough. Not many 17-year-olds sleep with their moms, but after waking to see a woman sitting on the side of my bed one night and disappearing before reaching the foot of my bed while walking away, I slept with her every night afterwards. She was a dark figure with no real features to me, but I could tell it was female. I also seen dark shadowy figures dancing in the basement. Everyone heard the heavy footsteps upstairs while we were all downstairs, scratching in the attic. We moved back to Kentucky when I graduated in '86, but even though the house had its issues, it was the only place I'd ever called home. I went back and visited the next owners years later, and they had all the same experience as we had. The only difference was a young couple had tried to live there, and when they had a new baby, the ghost got a little violent and knocked things from the walls. The young family moved for fear the baby would be harmed. Behind the house through the woods is a cemetery, 11 or 12 graves, all dated from the 1500s to 1800s. I used to hang out there to sneak and smoke cigarettes. I can't help but wonder if it was someone from there. I hope to someday get the time to go visit whoever lives there, 21 years later. There's a story on here about a house in Mudlick Hollow in Hardy, Kentucky, known to those who live there, or remembered by those who lived in the Sharondale, Kentucky area. The story states that the White House on the right is haunted. Correction. This house was owned by a lady by the name of Gracie. She lived in the house when I was a child, and never once was any report of anything unusual. She and her sister lived there for many years after she became quite old. These stories might have happened since her death. Across from her home in the old stomping grounds, there were many stories of ghosts of American Indians. It is reported that glimpses of these Indians can even be seen during the day. This was known as an Indian burial ground. I can verify this because I was one of the children who actually saw what appeared to be an Indian. The Indian seen was wearing what appeared to be hides and carrying a spear, or something that might have been a spear. I was not the only child who saw this during the day it happened. There were many of us there playing ball during recess from the grade school, and we all saw it. But there are many other hauntings in this area, and none of them mentioned here, such as the graveyard that was up on the mountain across Highway 119. This graveyard had been in disrepair even back in the 1950s. I used to play in that area as a kid, and know that there have been unusual happenings since even before that time. The train trestle that used to cross Old Highway 119 from the upper part of Sharondale coal camp to the side where the coal was loaded into the train car. That trestle was the one place for dares as a child. There were a few children who were injured there taking those dares. To this day, nobody knows what the real story is about the old trestle. The trestle is now gone, but the stories remain. There was also a house that was used for storage along those tracks. Part of the house was used for storage things for repair to the homes of the coal miners in the upper and lower coal mining camp homes. That particular home was rented to a couple with one child. The mother often came across the road to another home, completely frightened by things that happened in the home. She stated that the light bulbs were burst, even when there was no reasonable means of explaining it. Many stories of hauntings in the home still abound. Note, the homes are now gone. The highway programs that took the area for a larger highway. Miners whose lives were taken in coal mining accidents still roam that area. A woman who was killed by a big cat up on the mountain, whose shrill screams can still be heard during both day and night. Different areas in the mountain where soldiers were killed. Mines that were closed are also rumored to be haunted. The same area is known to have different stories of men who were killed by reveners back in the early 1900s. Men killed by reveners, some whose bodies were found, and others who just went missing. I have an experience to share with all of you. When my grandfather died, we went to my grandmother's house to check on her. She had a clock that when my great-great-grandmother died, it stopped ticking then. When my grandpa died, it started again. It had not ticked for a long time, for about over 100 years. My grandpa had always wanted to hear it too. Maybe it was him that did it, or just a coincidence. My gym basement at my school, when I went to the bathroom in gym class, my friend came too. It used to be a locker room for a high school. We were about halfway down the stairs when the lights started flickering on and off. Then the water at the sinks turned on, and the stall door slammed. Then we turned to run up the stairs, and in the corner, we saw a boy that you could see through, and he had a hunter green shirt with black dress pants. We screamed and ran up the stairs where most of our class was there, and no one believed us, but we knew what we saw. Me and my other friend, we went down there and had to use the bathroom, and she was scared to go by herself. Oh, I ended up going down there with her. We were standing at the bottom of the stairs, noticing how freezing it was, and it was so cold. Oh, she went over to the first stall, then she started to open it. Then I screamed, and then she said, "What?" I said, "Turn around," and that's when she did. What we both saw was a girl wearing a dress with bright red eyes, with a black outline of some sort. He had a possessed smile. That's when she said, "Leave." The way she looked into our eyes when we saw her was straight evil. And my friend and I had nothing to say. One time I went with another one of my friends down to that basement, and when we were there, we saw something strange and unwanted. We were standing at the very end of the stairs, and we were walking into the bathrooms, and at that very moment, we saw a strange-looking girl just standing there, and she was just staring at us. Now, keep in mind this used to be an old school that was at least 90 to 95 years old. Oh, me and my friend just stood there for a moment and stared at her. Then we suddenly saw her eyes were plain black. It was so scary. Then me and my friend slowly walked away. But as we were going up the stairs, we noticed that she was following us. We looked back. We wanted to, but at the same time we didn't. And there she was. It was truly freaky. This was so freaky that she was right behind us, reaching for us and wanting to touch us. So we ran. We thought no one would believe this horrible, frightening incident, but luckily quite a few people did. And that's why many people didn't like to go into the basement anymore. One summer, my 3 children, my sister-in-law and I were traveling to my hometown in South Carolina. We live in New York. Oh, it is a pretty long way to go. It was foggy that morning, and my car had been experiencing trouble. We broke down near Pennsylvania and found ourselves sitting on the side of the road, maybe about 8 hours from home. A police officer pulled up behind my car. My youngest was 2 months old. He was screaming very loudly. But when he saw this policeman, he started smiling and laughing. Dressed in an older style police uniform, it looked to be a style from the 70s. He had the most beautiful face and voice. He walked around my car and then laid his hands on my car. My car started to back up. Then he just disappeared. I can't explain it. I looked up from the dash seconds after I saw him standing in front of the car, and then he was gone. No policeman car. No police car. Nothing. No one. We didn't even see him leave. As a matter of fact, we didn't even see him pull up. I thank God for that angel in disguise. We made it home safely. I grew up in a house that was always open to everyone and warm, but it did have its secrets. When I was very young, and the house was empty, I would hear my name being called, and I would run from room to room, thinking someone was home. My brother said this also happened to him on Saturday mornings, when everyone was asleep and he watched cartoons. One night as a 12-year-old, I was sleeping in the upstairs hall while my room was being finished. I was sleeping with my face to the wall, and softly my shoulder was being pushed. Thinking someone in my family was wanting something, I turned around to face the room. There in front of me was a small couple, a man in a suit and a 1930s hat, and a sweet-looking woman with a pillbox-like hat. I think they liked what they saw because they looked at each other, then smiled, and then turned around to go down the stairs. I never saw them again. Many years later, in a conversation with my mother, she told me the small house with the low ceilings and low working areas was built for a couple in 1939, and before they could move in, they died in a fatal car accident. I guess they were just checking up on their home. Well, my boyfriend is a non-believer, but he says he wants to believe. Oh, back before we started dating, we would find things to do where he might see something and come around. I was very picky about these places because I'm a firm believer, and also I scare easily. Oh, I didn't want to get myself into a situation that I would have a hard time with. As a result, I choose places that I've been to many times and was comfortable with. We had been to a few, and I'd heard something or whatever, but generally I've attributed this to my imagination because I was worked up, but one experience stands out. We were on the USS Constellation, known for hauntings, but I had taken him there more as a glimpse of my own past. As a native Baltimorean, or Baltimorean, as my father likes to say, and a lover of history,
I practically grew up on it. I was completely relaxed as I usually am there, and Rob and I were standing on the orlop dock, looking over the rail. It's my favorite place on the ship. Don't ask me why. My least favorites are outside the Champlain's corners and in the infirmary. Given the history of the ship, the orlop really shouldn't be my fave, but it is. Oh, we have been standing there in silence for a few minutes, just kind of taking it in. It was a cold day, and we went there right after work, so there was hardly anyone else on the vessel. And so after a few moments of quiet, I say, "Put it out." What, he replies. Well, he knew what he did. He put his hand around my waist, upping the curve of my hip, as we weren't dating at this time. And in fact, I believe we were both seeing other people when this happened. I thought this was pretty dang inappropriate. I turned to tell him so. He was standing too far away from me to have done that. He didn't move as I was standing directly next to him, and would have noticed. "What?" he said again, a little more forcefully, looking rather concerned for my sanity. "Nothing," I said. I didn't want to think about it and ruin one of my favorite childhood retreats. After we were off the ship, I told him what had happened. He still really wasn't convinced, and I'm the one who experienced something. Not him, but he did admit that the ghost has good taste. That's sweet, I think. I just want to say that I love your website, and couldn't help but to share my story with you. A few years ago, my great-grandfather was very ill and in a nursing home. My family and I lived far away from him. We only made a trip up to see him around Christmas and his birthday. One day when I was 15, and my brother was only about 2, we were sitting in my living room watching TV, when all of a sudden my little brother started crying. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he wanted to go see Papa. I thought it was weird because he had only met Papa a few times. My mom came in the room and told him that Papa was very far away, but that we would go see him soon. My brother started crying harder and was screaming, "I want to see Papa now." My mom held her in her lap and kept telling him not to worry, that Papa was fine and we would go see him soon. When he started to calm down, the phone rang. It was my aunt. He told us that Papa just passed away. My whole family was creeped out by this experience, and none of us had really talked about it since. My little brother does not even remember it. This took place in 1993, and I have 2 separate stories, same place and year. When I was about 16, I was living with some friends in Cleveland, Texas. I was attending school there with my best friend Mary, and living with her and her family. We had a couple friends that we went to school with. One girl was very strange, shall we say. We will call her Claire, and there was the other friend named Barbie. We lived almost at the end of a long, narrow, dead-end dirt road. There was only about 6 houses on the road, and we were surrounded by woods. We lived in the next to last house on the street, and Claire lived in the house that marked the dead-end road, and her family rarely came out in the daytime. They were more night creatures, if you will, and they had about 6 stray cats just hanging around the house. Mary and I decided to stay the night with Claire one night, and in the nighttime when it all got very weird, Claire was talking about witches and witchcraft and sorts, when suddenly I saw right behind Claire that there was a witch's head just hanging from the ceiling. I mean, it was staring right at me with big bulging red eyes, and it seemed real. When I told Claire it was right on the ceiling, she looked, and there was nothing. And to this day, I have no idea if I was hallucinating or if I really saw something evil. Our family had an experience several years back in our old house. I tried to submit the story a few years back, but I don't think it ever was posted. I'm the last one to say I believe in ghosts, and normally when people tell me they saw a ghost, I listen, but figure they are full of it. Well, this time I'm glad that my entire family heard it. I don't care if anybody else believes me because at least we know it happened. It happened several years ago, maybe a good 28 years ago. I was around 7, if not younger. At the time I was sleeping in my parents' room with my dad, and my mom went to lay down with my brother since he had the flu. The way our house was is that we have 3 bedrooms and 2 doors that we kept closed, that closed off of the back of the house to the living room and kitchen. We had all just started to fall asleep when we were woken up by a really loud thump, then the sound of something heavy running and ripping up the carpet. It reminded me of our old cat that used to run down the hall, and her claws would get stuck in the carpet, but this was much, much louder. The noise came and went very fast. My dad had jumped up and got his gun and went outside thinking it was someone running on our roof, but there was nothing. He came back and asked us all if we heard it, and we did. To this day, we have no idea what it was, and it never happened again. My brother and I talk about it to this day, and we get chills thinking about it. I'm sure it is something that could be explained. But what? It was too loud for any house noise. Our plumbing we never had issues with. Like I said, I'm glad our entire family heard it, so that way, they know I'm not making something up. I've never had another experience like that again, and now I'm interested in the idea of hauntings, but I normally am more on the factual and fantasy side, but that has made me think that just maybe there's something to all the supernatural. One thing I know about my story, I know it is real. I've read other stories on the site and think a lot of them are fabricated, and I'm sure if reading mine, people will think I'm making it up, or my entire family is making it up, but we know it happened. My stories were told to me. The first was told by my dad. My dad was an 18-wheeled truck driver. The stories he told seemed far-fetched, but I swear to God he's telling the truth. One night driving a long stretch of highway, he came upon a beautiful dog. The dog barked, but he knew he had hit the dog. He got out of the cab of the truck with his flashlight, who gave the dog a proper burial. When he looked up and down the ravines, and what he found was not a dog, but a family with the dog. They had crashed down the ravine 2 hours earlier. The family survived, but the dog didn't. The next story was told by my brother, and now sister-in-law, then girlfriend. In 1995, my brother came to Texas, then Georgia, to be with our dad. At that time, he was very ill. My sister-in-law, then girlfriend, was in Georgia. Our dad passed away late at night. My brother decided to wait till morning to call my sister because she had to be working early the next morning. My sister-in-law called crying instead. She was scared and shaking. Then she said that about 2 a.m., she got up to get a drink in the kitchen, walked into the living room, and that's when she saw Dad sitting on the couch. Then she said hi to him, then continued into the kitchen, and then realized that he was supposed to be in Texas, not knowing he had passed yet. That's when she walked back into the living room, where he was sitting, telling her he needs to tell her something, and she screamed no, and runs back into the bedroom, then slams the door, locks it, and calls her best friend cousin, who was a cop, to come to the house, and no one is there. When my brother tells her our dad had passed, that is when she freaks out more. I just wish I knew what he wanted to tell her. Oh well.
This actually began here in Lazuka, the capital of Zambia, back in 1983 when I was a young girl of 5. For some reason, I always woke at 3 a.m. on the dot, whilst living at our home at the time, and found myself walking down the hallway. We had security lights in the garden, therefore shadows would play off trees, bushes, and windows onto the interior walls of the house, like a Russian puppet show. With a security guard present each night, I would think the shadowy shape of a man appearing or disappearing suddenly was simply that,
our guard doing the rounds. It wasn't until one final night, after my usual check of the houses, I was walking back to my room when I just felt something behind me. Wish I hadn't, because the shadowy figure of a man was right behind me, away from the walls and lights, but very distinctive. I was scared, but to be honest, looking back now, cannot even remember feeling evil, just curiosity. A few months after, I started experiencing visions and dreams. I would start having a dream of a little funny white man standing in my doorway, looking at me with a mean little grin on his face. Then, he would walk off in the direction of my brother's room, whereby I once woke up to hear my brother screaming for my mom, saying there was something in his room. This experience happened only once, but the dreams of this little man continued. When we moved to the UK in 1986, my final experience occurred with this man. I heard my name being called from downstairs, but when I reached the top of the stairs from my bedroom, looking down into the pitch black, and feeling utter malevolence directed at me, I couldn't see anything, but it was the same sensation I feel when dreaming of the white man. Let's just say at the age of 11, I had the good sense not to investigate. After that, I stopped experiencing little white man, but I feel I became susceptible to other things from then on. Our house in the UK is set on what was once the Beanoak Estate Farm. It's said that a mass grave of 1800s cholera victims lies within the vicinity of our estate, which could explain the experience, and not just for me. Our cat would get spooked, and my mother was terrified one night. Our cat would suddenly sit up and stare at the corner of the room, or the doorway, or an armchair, and suddenly start to growl and raise his hackle. Then he would move his head as though watching something walk through the room. It frightened me one night when he sat up from my lap and dug his claws into my thighs. The growling reached a crescendo, as though he was going into battle with another Tom. I got so spooked, I left the room and went upstairs. My cat had left via the cat flap into the night. He wouldn't come back until the morning. What really spooked me the most was, this also happened during the day one February morning. I can handle the nighttime frights because of the sense of normality when the sun rises. But when you are invaded during the day, all your security is shattered. My brother and I both experienced what is now learned a sleep paralysis event at exactly the same time, one night. Both of us also witnessed just before a sudden flash of brilliant blue. For two people of differing sexes to experience exactly the same time makes it disturbing, and we still discuss it today. My other experience of sleep paralysis was when I was fully awake. Lying on my tummy reading a book on my bed, I suddenly had the overwhelming terror swamp me from my feet upwards, and I couldn't move. Then, at the foot of my bed, I could feel as though someone was taking a step onto the mattress between both feet. When I could finally move, I turned around to see an indentation of a foot where the sensation was. Thank you for taking your time to read my experiences, for that is all I can call them. I did have one other experience, but it's too terrifying to write down, and causes me fear, even to this day. When I was 6 or 7 months pregnant with my son Anthony, I had a terrifying nightmare. I believe this nightmare was a portal to the afterlife, that what I saw was in fact a ghost trying to communicate with me. Every night I would sleep with the bedroom door half open, and also had the hallway light on, just because of the weird and bizarre events that would occur in this old home. I'd always thought I'd hear laughter during the day, sounds of doors opening and closing, and other little things that made me convinced my house was haunted. One evening, I swore I saw a small dark shadow figure float into the kitchen from my bedroom. It happened so fast, I didn't have much time to process it. My nightmare was very similar to this experience. I was convinced that I woke up in my bed before. At least at the time I thought I was conscious. I was glued to my bed, couldn't move at all, virtually paralyzed. I started hearing strange noises, like a gargling coming from the hallway outside of my room. I remember struggling to open and close my eyes. All of a sudden, I was able to focus my eyes and move my head where I could see that the door was open. I saw this little girl standing in my doorway. She was a black shadow from 5 feet away from my bed. She approached closer to me, all while I was still paralyzed and couldn't move. The black shadow whispered, "Don't be scared, I'll be home soon." That's when I woke up, sweating and screaming. Even after realizing it was a nightmare, I could still feel the presence of the shadow in that house. The same girl from my nightmare. I thought it was a bit ridiculous, because I knew at that point, my mind had just conjured this up in my head, even with all the previous signs of ghostly activity. What's even weirder, a few days after I received a call from my sister, she was very emotional because she announced to me that she was having a child. The reason why my sister was so emotional was because she had tried for years and years to have children, and she was never able to. Her doctor even told her that she was never going to be able to produce a child. I bet you the shadow from my nightmare came back as her living child. I was never able to find out the history of this house or who lived there, but I can bet you that the little girl used to, and she told me that she was coming back to life. I've noticed that you don't have any ghosts listed for the University Calgary residences in Calgary, Alberta. I had a strange experience in the residence tower called Randall Hall. I'll give you some brief information. There are 2 identical towers, plus some apartment-style residences that were built in the late 1960s when the university was founded. They are both 7 stories tall, with a central communal lounge and 3 hallways radiating out like spokes. Each hallway has 11 rooms and a bathroom. Originally, they were built as a female dorm and a male dorm. I spent 3 years of my university living in Randall Hall. The room that I shared with my roommate was in the co-ed hallway of the 6th floor of Randall. This kind of applies because we shared all facilities with guys. Toilet stalls, urinals, sinks, and showers were all communal. Think Ally McBeal. And we often had guys hang out in our room. Let's just say that there were quite a few of us engineers on that floor. I started the year living in room 661. One night, I awoke frequently, and I could have sworn that there was someone in my room, sitting in the chair at my roommate's desk. I passed it off as being asleep, but the next day I did ask my roommate, "Were there any people in our room last night?" All she said was, "Yeah, I thought that one of the guys had come in during the night." Weird. Anyway, a little later in the year, I moved into room 557, on the same side of the hallway, 2 doors down. We started noticing that in the common room, which was a large open area in the center of the spokes, one of the elevators would often come up to our floor on its own accord, open, close, then go back down to the main floor.
Sometimes we would stay on our floor with the door open for almost an hour before going back down. My real experience came during reading break. I guess your guys' equivalent to spring break, only we have ours in early to mid-February, and most people leave because the skiing's awesome in the Rockies, only a few hours away. In our hallway, the only people not gone was me, my roommate, the girls across the hall, and the girl at the end of the hall, on our side by the fire escape. To start my real story, I'll give you guys a little explanation about how our room was laid out. If you walk into the door from the hallway, there's a closet on each side that extends about 2 feet into the room, that goes all the way to each wall. No doors in the closets. The room is approximately square. My roommate's bed was against the left wall, with her desk against the window, directly across the door, and the chair between her headboard and the desk. My bed was against the window, with the headboard against the right wall, with my desk along the right wall. I awoke one night because I swore that the door to our room had opened, and that one of the guys from the guy's wing had come in. He had gone on a date that night and was a close friend. I looked over at my roommate's bed, and it looked like this guy was whispering something to her. I found it kind of creepy though, that instead of crouching by her bed like a normal person would do, he was standing with his legs straight, bent at the waist, with his face about 2 inches from hers. Now, I got kinda pissed off because it was the middle of the night and this guy had come in to tell Lauren about his date. I wanted to see what time it was, so I sat up in bed so I could see around my desk to my alarm clock, which was on a dresser in the closet. It was 2:30-ish in the morning, so I turned my head to yell or whisper strongly at this guy. Then I realized it wasn't who I thought it was. This is the creepy part. He stayed bent over my roommate in the same position, but slowly turned his head to look at me. While he was turning his head, this grin spread across his face. One could interpret this grin as malevolent. I sure did at the time. Then he slowly stood straight up and took a few steps backward towards the closet, folded his arms across his chest, and looked at me with the same scary grin on his face. It was strange because really, he had no facial features. Nothing of a face that I could see, except for this grin that I could more sense than see. Well, that was enough for me. Like any 20 going on 6-year-old, I dove beneath the covers of my bed and stayed there all night. This was very hard to do, since the heating is very efficient in those buildings, and most of the rooms are usually hot enough to be in shorts and tanks in. Anyway, I didn't sleep again that night. After a week or so, thinking about this experience, having insomnia, and sleeping with the light on, I have second thoughts on what was going on there. I think that yes, he was intentionally trying to scare someone, but only out of a sense of fun, because he knew he could. I think he had my roommates in his target sights, and he had his face by my roommates, waiting for her to wake up with this ghost face 2 inches from hers. Well, you could wake my roommate up with a cherry bomb when she's sleeping, never mind waking to a ghostly presence like so many of us do. Instead, I woke up, and his grin was more of a, finally, someone's awake that I can scare grin. So that was it, other than the knocking, which is actually quite funny. It was about 2 days after my experience, when all 3 of our rooms got simultaneous knocks at 5:30 in the morning. My roommate got up to answer the door and scared the crap out of both her and the girl directly across from her by opening the door at the exact same time. Also, The girl at the end of the hall had her head out of the door, asking if someone had knocked. There was no one in the hall, and no way someone could have left without us hearing. The door into the central common room was on a mnemonic hinge and made a whining noise when you opened it. The door to the fire escape at the other end makes a crapload of noise, which echoes through the floors. The door to the bathroom also has a mnemonic hinge and bangs when it closes. Anyway, to close this outrageously long story out, I worked for housekeeping during the summer because the residents are rented out like hotel rooms. I didn't go back home in the summer. I was talking with the cleaner from the 6th floor while doing laundry one day. She related that she has had experiences with this guy over the last few years. She was cleaning a room after move out and had the door propped open with the garbage can. A guy poked his head around the door, looked her in the eye, kicked the garbage out from in front of the door, and slammed it. There was no one there when she went to look. There are rumors that a guy got really stressed out during exams in the 80s and threw himself off the roof into the parking lot. I've not substantiated his claims, so who knows. I do know that the roofs are now off limits to students, whereas they weren't in the past. The cleaner says that he is quite shy and is only seen during summer, Christmas, on reading breaks, never when the residences are filled with people. This isn't the first time I've told someone this. Normally people don't believe me because I'm only 14, but I swear that everything I'm about to say is the honest truth. My first experience happened 6 years ago. My friend was sleeping over at mine. We couldn't sleep, so we were just talking in the dark. Well, it wasn't that dark because I had the curtains open. I remember it being a few minutes past midnight. I also remember thinking my friend had stood up because there was a shadow on the wall opposite us, but she was still lying down. But she too had seen the shadow. It had no features and was only head and shoulders. It was where my light switch was. We both looked outside to see if anyone was there. Nothing. So we started to really freak out and closed the curtains as quick as possible. And when we reopened them a few seconds later, it was gone. I have no explanation for this. I definitely wasn't dreaming, and neither of us had imagined it. Later on that year, I was alone in the house watching a video. I stopped the video to get something to eat downstairs. When I came back, the video had been took out from my video player and was on my bed. My next experience happened maybe about 5 or 4 years ago. I was on the computer, and I was the only one in the house, as my brother was out, and my mom and dad were out working. I didn't have any music on at the time, and the TV wasn't on either. Basically, things were silent. I heard this voice coming from downstairs calling my name. It was definitely a woman's voice, maybe in her late 20s. I wasn't sure at this time. I really started to freak out. It lasted for around 5 minutes, and then it stopped. The next couple of times I heard it really scared me. The last time I heard it, I was home alone again. The TV was on mute, and I was on the computer again. The voice came from right next to me. It shouted my name into my ear. It shocked me so badly that I actually screamed so loud that the people next door heard me. Since then, I haven't heard it, but recently, I've been hearing music playing in and outside of my house. Also recently, things keep happening in my room, like I keep feeling cold spots, and a lot of the time, I feel like I'm not the only one in the room. It's really scary, Plus, my TV has been on mute or changed channels when I'm nowhere near the remote. It scares me a lot. It's shook me up so bad that I hate being alone in the house. This occurred roughly 20 years ago when I was 19 or 20, and I was sleeping over at my boyfriend's apartment in Spring Valley, California. My boyfriend left for work by 4 a.m., and I was alone in the apartment. This one morning after he left, I awoke on my back to a heaviness in the room. It was still dark, but becoming dawn. I looked to my right, and standing next to me by the bed was this tall black shrouded shadow entity. I was terrified. I could feel its presence surrounding me. Then, it spoke. I was lying there wide-eyed and in shock. I'm not still sure how I heard it. Was it audible, or just in my head? The voice was deep and gruff, and asked, "What are you doing here?" I'm familiar with some experiences with the paranormal, just never had it been so terrifying. I closed my eyes and began the Lord's Prayer. By the last words, "Deliver me from evil, Amen," the room had cleared. I felt the change immediately, and when I reopened my eyes, all was normal again. I told my boyfriend later that day, and he thought it was his deceased grandfather being curious. My boyfriend's grandma was recently staying with him, and she would tell him stories of the grandfather visiting her. Possible, I guess, but I still wonder what the black shrouded entity was, and what its intentions were. For many years, I had a gray cat named Kitty. Kitty didn't like many people. She mainly only liked me. She always slept up against my legs at night, on the outside of the covers. She loved to be close to me. After she died, I was absolutely miserable. I missed her so much. After a few days, I started getting a glimpse of her walking around the house, out of the corner of my eye. I didn't say anything to anyone for a while. One day, my aunt said that she didn't realize that we had gotten another cat after Kitty had died. I told her that we didn't have any other cats, or any other pets for that matter. She was absolutely convinced that she had seen a cat walk across the doorway in our living room. One night, just as I was going to sleep, I felt Kitty jump up onto the bed and cuddle up against me. I could feel her pressing up against my legs. I tried my best to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but my husband felt her jump onto the bed also. Over the years, she has gradually stopped coming around us so much. She still shows up whenever I'm upset or sick. I guess she just likes to comfort me, just like she did when she was alive. Hello. I grew up in an old apartment building in the Fordham Hills section of the Bronx. When I was about 14 years old, I was speaking on the telephone to my best friend, who lived upstairs on the 5th floor of the building. My apartment was on the 2nd floor. My friend said that she was going to go down to my apartment in a few minutes. As soon as I hung up the telephone, there was a knock on the door. I wondered how my friend could have possibly made it down 3 flights of stairs so quickly. As we hung up the phone that second, I went to the door and looked out of the peephole to see if it was her. There, at the door, stood a tall young-looking man, wearing a ruffled white shirt, a thick black belt, black pants, and black boots that went almost to his knees. Hanging from the side of his belt was a sword or a saber. As I stared at him, It appeared as though he was looking right at me with piercing blue eyes, even though the door was between us. I then noticed that I could see the number on the apartment door across from mine through his shirt. I quickly ran from the door, realizing what I had seen, thoroughly frightened, and called my friend, asking her to hurry and come down as I was alone in the house. I will never forget it for as long as I live. I did some research and learned that there was Revolutionary battles on in a Mug Fort Dam Hill. I came to the conclusion that the ghost was a Revolutionary War soldier, probably British from the clothing. I only wish I could learn more. Nothing occurred for the rest of the time that I lived in that apartment. Thanks for having a great site where people can share their experiences. Like a lot of people, I've had friends and family members pass away. One of my best friends was John, who died from pancreatic cancer while still in his early 30s. Many years later, I started a habit while praying. I asked God to help me always remember my friends and family who have passed away, who influenced me, and who are a big part of my life. Then I think of their names and say them silently in prayer. About a year ago, our friend and family priest passed away, and I attended the funeral mass. As I was kneeling in the pews, I felt someone beside me. I looked to my right, and there, plain as day, was John. He was there for only 2, maybe 3 seconds, and then disappeared. I shook my head and looked again, but he was gone. I hadn't thought about John at all that day, and I may never know why he decided to show himself. I know that God puts people into your life for a reason, and I know that even after they are gone, they're always with you. I love you, brother. Thanks for the visit.
Hey Phantoms, could you do me a little bit of a favor here? If you got to the end of the video, please let me know in the comment section below. The keyword will be Weasel Halloween. If you got to the end of the video, write Weasel Halloween. That way I know you enjoyed it, I know you're engaging, I know you like the content, and you want to see more of this content for future uploads. So guys, let me know. What are your plans for Halloween? I don't know. I know it's a little bit early. It's still August. We haven't even got through Labor Day yet in America. But let me know. Comments, likes, and subscribes are always appreciated. You know, it really helps the channel, small channels like me, grow further. A lot of people call me a small channel, which, I mean, no, I call myself a small channel, but that's not what I even meant to say. I meant to say, I don't know. I really don't know. I'm just gonna go, you know. But anyway, if you got to the end of this video, write Weasel Halloween, that way I know. Engagement is really important, and I used to be so good at talking at the end of these videos, or maybe I just had the illusion that I was, I don't know. Now I just sound like a poop. Anyway guys, love you, see you in the next video, and happy Halloween soon, 2023.